So, I'm Jason Ditzel from Bennett Adelson. I'm the Information Worker Practice Director here. So we do a lot of SharePoint work in my department. Today, we're going to talk about line of business solutions with SharePoint Online. Okay, so specifically one type of line of business solution, which is my personal favorite. As everybody here knows about SharePoint, right? And okay, so when I say that, you know, the timer job pattern is one of my favorites. So that allows us to, well, SharePoint's built on it. SharePoint on-prem is built on timer jobs, right? If we spend any time with it in the administration console, you can see timer jobs running for profile service, for search, all types of work, right? And one thing that we used to do is create timer jobs on-prem, or still do, to do processing in the background, right? So now, when we go to SharePoint Online, we can no longer deploy timer jobs the traditional way. But with Azure Functions, we can do the same thing, all right? So I'm going to show the solution, how it's pieced together, and I'll walk through all of the Azure functionality, and then we also have a new programming model that just released in the spring. It's available for on-premises also, which is the SharePoint Framework. That's the open source stack, okay? So Microsoft built, wanted any web developer to be able to write SharePoint customizations, all right? So these things are all JavaScript based versus the old C# DLL full trust way, all right? So I'm going to show both sides of it. All right, so let's see. All right, so the goal for tonight is to show you how I built the weather control in the red circle. All right. The idea here, and this is I think a good example of how these timer job solutions work, is that the left-hand side, the Azure Function Timer, that thing is going to collect information. Okay. Specifically from this third party called Dark Sky. Dark Sky publishes a REST API with the current forecast. All right, so I give it my geocode, or my really long longitude and latitude, and it gives me the weather forecast for that area. Okay, so I get the high and low, and then the forecasted weather pattern. All right. Now, the idea is that we're going to use this function to poll Dark Sky every 30 minutes. All right, so they charge for their API, and in a lot of cases, you want to cache this data because it's not, it's not necessary to be precise, right? 30 minutes is good enough. Okay. So the Azure function is going to go out and harvest that data. It's going to write it to a list, which is down here on the bottom in SharePoint Online. And you can see the modified date. When we look at it in real life, it's going to be updated every 30 minutes, right? And we're going to find it somewhere in the middle, all right? So then our SharePoint framework is going to go after the weather list, and it's going to go ahead and render the weather, okay? So the idea is that you would make just that circled part into a web part for your intranet, set all this up, and you got the weather control, which we found from our customers was like the -- thing that they, the feedback is like, oh, I love the weather, which is okay for custom intranets. All right. All right. So let me see if my okay. So I'm going to go into the details of all this stuff. I just called it the Hello World web part. I have a little bit of a bug here, but we're going to go ahead and make it work. So you can see that there is animation here because this JavaScript library that I'm using to make those cool icons, all right, does some HTML5 rendering, okay, and it's drawing that as if it were on a canvas. It's called the canvas in HTML5, right? Okay, so that is just mock data, and we'll get to it later, right? You'll see I have the wrong day right there. Okay, so let's go ahead with the presentation. By the way, this is the new Mozilla developer browser. Has everybody seen that yet? Yeah, it just came out the other day.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so I thought it was kind of cool.
Firefox?
Yeah.
What's it do for us?
It has a bunch of developer controls loaded. It's rendering a lot faster than regular Firefox, and they purport that they did that on purpose. So I found that while working on this project over the last couple of weekends, that this is now comparable to like Chrome's developer tools. They did a good job because Firefox is a little bit not as good as Chrome, but they caught up with this thing. And if you can see down here, it's a little blue Firefox. All right. Have you seen that yet, Richard?
No. Is it running a different
engine
than Firefox?
I didn't look in depth. I just like to take the newest Lazy Gray stuff and just go.
My question is, is it going to work in Firefox just because it works in this browser?
Yeah, oh yeah, it does. I've tried with different browsers. Okay. All right. So here is the architecture, high-level architecture diagram of the old way we used to do a line of business solution. All right. So number one is our data source, right? Darksky.net. Do we need to share over here? So that's our weather forecasting API that we're trying to go and harvest from. All right, number two is SharePoint on-premises. So that whole rectangle is our on-premises container, right? Three is a timer service engine. So that's a Windows service that's running on our SharePoint on-premises farm. Four would be the retrieve weather timer job that we would create that hooks up into that timer service engine, right? And that thing would run every 5.1 every 30 minutes. 5.2 it writes it to the weather list. 6 is our weather list. 7 is the way we would do a web part. Typically C#, ASCX, DLLs, full trust solutions that we have to deploy to the farm. It has to run inside of the number 2, the SharePoint on-premises rectangle, right? It does, when the user hits the SharePoint page on which the web part lives, an HTTP request is issued 8.1, and 8.2, the weather web part queries number 6 instead of number 1 to get the information, right? So has anybody developed their custom timer jobs here? Okay.
Time ago,
yeah.
online.
Right. So this is a design pattern that you're familiar with then. Okay. All right. So why the old way doesn't work in the cloud? So we are not allowed to run our DLLs on the SharePoint Online SharePoint servers. Okay. So a timer job has to have a DLL registered to make number 4 work. All right. And so we're not allowed to do that anymore. Why? All right, so the web part solution, right? So number 7 has to be deployed again on the SharePoint farm, and we're not allowed to do that either, right? So we can't write the ASCX files down on the disk, and we can't, do the DL. So now what? We've kind of talked about what we would do here. So here is what the solution would look like that I've created. All right. Number 1 still is dark sky. 2 is our Azure tenant. All right. So now, for a developer, we're going to make these available. So we just had 2 pictures taken in the back of the room. That was pretty good. Yeah. Okay. So.
He just went to slide.
Yeah. All right. So the what was I saying? All right, so Azure tenant. So as a developer, I went out for the the Azure development or the Visual Studio Development Essentials. Okay, so that's a community edition of Visual Studio, and then you can sign up in that program for an Azure tenant. You have to give a credit card, but it doesn't get hit unless you actually want it to. So it'll stop. It gives you $25 a month, right, to play around with some Azure. That's enough for platform as a service work. Okay, just trying things out, right, getting it working. You couldn't run a web server, a whole SQL servers, Azure SQL or any virtual machine.
You can do it for an hour at a time.
Yeah, it'll be done in a second.
So does it enforce the spending cap?
All right, does it enforce the spending cap? Yes, it does.
So if you use your $25 and the month isn't over yet,
It disables it.
quits. It kills it. It cheerfully offers to let you remove the spending cap so you can spend more money.
Correct. Now, this Azure function has not been consuming compute cycles. Just doing this, running it every 30 minutes for the past week. I would say 3 days, it's cost 3 cents. I mean, it's not a lot, right?
We were here 2 months ago when Tim Schmelzer of Bennett Adelson gave a talk about Azure Functions. Yeah, some of you were here. So if you, well, I'm interrupting. You want to go on with that?
Was he able to spend?
He was able to explain that with Azure Functions, you have a choice of 2 pricing models. There's the traditional pricing model where you pay a fixed amount per month for a level of service, and you pay that fixed amount, never more, but you pay it whether you use the service or not. Okay? And even if you disable it, you're still paying that same monthly amount. Now they have an additional, they call it the consumption model.
Yeah, that's what I'm signed up for.
Which is what you're signed up for, and that is what Microsoft is recommending that everybody look at now, which is strictly pay as you go. If the service never runs at all, you pay nothing, and every time it does run, you pay the same low amount, but it's always the same amount, and it doesn't matter whether it did anything useful or not. So if it goes and checks the weather every 30 minutes and the weather hasn't changed, you still run a cycle. You're still heating up a little bit of CPU, and you're going to get charged a little bit for doing that.
Okay.
Oh, and I'm sorry, you can put a cap on it so that you can say if this thing goes nuts or if somebody hacks it and starts gives me a denial of service attack, it will shut itself off once the monthly dollar amount hits a certain limit. So you can't put a fail-safe on.
Yes, please don't launch a denial of service attack against my Azure function because my credit card's attached to it. All right. So number 2, we have the Azure tenant that we just talked about. Number 3, our retrieve weather function runs inside that tenant. All right. It then goes and pulls in 4.1 to dark sky. 4.2, it writes to the weather list. Okay. There's a little bit of trickery in 4.2 because I have hard-coded a service account into 4.2 username and password. I'm sure there's a better Azure way to do that. So I will get with Richard after this presentation to find that way in some sort of secure store. It goes and hits the SPO tenant, which I have running as a Office 365 developer tenant. Again, you can go request that for free. All right, to set that up, I think you have, I want to say 30 days, 60 days. Then you have to create a new one. Okay. In that tenant, we have a site collection that holds a weather list. We have a SharePoint page with the SPFX web part on it. And then same thing. User authenticates and hits SharePoint page, and we look at the list. Okay. All right, so we talked a little bit about these Azure functions. They're serverless compute experience. We can create them in C#, JavaScript, F#, Python, PHP. There's PowerShell and others. All right. Now, okay, so the one I created was a timer-based processing Azure function. All right, so the trigger is a timer. So all Azure functions execute on triggers. It's either an external call or it is a wake up because it detects something happened, or it is a timer like this. Okay, so there's multiple ways. In the next slide here, there's excellent Visual Studio 2017 integration. I mean, I was impressed with the way this just worked. Okay, so you have to install the Azure components, right? When you install Visual Studio 2017, you're going to get that installation screen. You're going to pick the Azure components, and then the Azure function will show up there. Okay.
Will it work on 2015?
I don't know. Does it? What? I don't know. I use the latest and greatest.
Most of the Azure SDK stuff is supported on 2015 also. I don't know if this is great. It does work on 2017. That's what you all should use.
And this is the community version too?
Yeah.
Any edition of Visual Studio 2017, including the free community edition, supports pretty much everything having to do with that.
I really like this way. I mean, I'm a huge fan of these Azure functions. Okay.
Go ahead.
So here's the next screen that you get when you create the Azure function. You can see up top, Event Hub Trigger, that's an Azure thing. We have a Service Bus Topic Trigger, another Azure thing that you can connect to. Generic webhook, right?
Not an Azure thing.
Right. That is actually these webhooks are ways that your Azure function can listen for events, basically. All right. So these are listeners for things to happen that support the webhooks API to wake your function up. All right. Service bus queue, GitHub, queue trigger. All right. Something comes in a queue, wake up, service this. That's an Azure queue, I take it, right? Okay. So timer trigger is what I created. HTTP trigger, so that would be a function call, an external call, right? And one with parameters. I haven't tried that one yet. SAS token, not sure what that is. Do you, Richard?
Not sure how that would turn into a trigger.
Yeah.
That one I'm not sure about.
All right. So then we have HTTP put, get, and then a GitHub commenter. And there's more that I didn't show you. Scroll down. So anyway, a lot of ways to trigger these functions, okay? Now in our schedule up top, there is a cron expression, which is interesting, that lets us set the schedule, okay? So in our case, we'll see that 5 up there is the minute, so we're going to do the slash every 30 minutes, okay? And we'll see that going forward. All right, so let's...
Here's a tip.
Yes.
If your Azure function doesn't work, and it's triggered by a timer, look at that cron expression, because there's no IntelliSense helping you get that right, and if you're not a Unix, Linux kind of guy, it's easy to not understand that.
I was kind of surprised that it was a cron expression, but that's more of a Linux thing, right? Unix.
Some open source happy cat at Microsoft decides that was what
All right, hang on a second while I fire up Visual Studio 2017, and we're going to go look at the code. Oh man, it's telling me it's taking a few minutes. Okay. Here we go.
Just off the top of your head, when do you have to move from community to professional? I mean, can I take the developers put on community so
No.
develop functions?
No, I can't use community for any work.
We can use it to play, but if we say, oh, we're going to say,
why can't you?
It's against the license to do it for professional work.
Okay.
I think. Well, look at let's put.
developer tool versus the production tool concept.
Let's put it this way. We looked into it recently for us as consultants to use it, and I was using it at home, right, on my home computer. Here, I have the professional installed. All right.
But we've got some junior folks that I would like to start to lean on it, but I don't spend $45 discount per month for people who are going to use it 5 to 10 hours a month.
Right.
I think you can make an argument that just learning would count as community development.
Well, the thing is, I mean, they're going to produce stuff, but it's going to consume the same amount of time for the peer review to get through. So the actual production would be occurring by build with the full license. So I think that's an affirmative defense.
All right, sorry for the delay. There we go.
Never, ever heard of Microsoft going after anyone's legal for unauthorized use of any MSDN licensed product or community edition things.
Now, the only time I've had problems is if you start using SQL developer licenses and start hitting that with production and forget either conveniently or unintentionally
All right.
to license them. That is expensive for Microsoft.
All right, here we go. So once I've created this Azure function through the wizard, okay, I get some C# code here, and when I named it, I received a retrieve weather CS class. Okay, in here you can see that the entrance point that the engine uses to hit the DLL is called run. All right, static function called run. And you can see also that there's a timer trigger class here that's created with, my 30-minute timer. Okay. I go out and hit the Dark Sky API. You can see the URL here. So yeah, I had to sign up with a developer key. All right, that's what this GUID is right here. And then latitude, longitude, and then I say what I want from this API, exclude minute hourly. Okay, so I'm going to get a response back. It's just a JSON response, and I'm going to go ahead and move it into my weather info classes. I'm just going to take 3 days right now. It'd be cool, to say end days, right, and extend this thing. Go ahead and fill in the temperatures and the highs and lows, and then hit my SBO site, okay, right here. And I'm using the client-side API from this C# code to go and hit SharePoint. Secure screening, don't look at my password, it's now in YouTube forever. And update the weather data, okay? So one of the things that we want to do next with this code is store a password securely in Azure. I just didn't have time to figure that one out yet, but there's got to be a recommended way to do that. All right, so this is very straightforward writing to SharePoint type of code, right? Retrieving information, writing it. And all we had to really do was create this one function, and I'm good to go. All right. So now, go ahead.
I got one comment. You're not using asynchronous functions here, methods here.
I'm not.
Probably should.
Okay. All right. So I got a -1 on the code review.
Well, because this is running in a serverless environment, but there's still resources out there. And another thing that we neglected to tell you about Azure Functions is that they have a timeout period, which I believe is 30 minutes, which by default, you can pay more for the service and get that to be longer. 30 minutes should be plenty of time to do anything, and it's almost certainly going to be enough time for this. But just in case, it's not a bad idea to, whenever there's an asynchronous version of an I/O, an external I/O call that you're going to make, like the two of them we're making here, one to the cloud service, one to the Dark Sky, and one to the SharePoint, you should use the asynchronous version and wait it so that you're not consuming more resource than you need to on the serverless, so-called serverless environment. There really are servers, you just don't see them.
So the interesting thing here, when I got this set up to work, is that the system.net and the Microsoft SharePoint client, all right, references, I didn't know how I was going to refer to those and if they would work up in Azure, right? You know, how does that work? Well, I didn't have to think about it much. I just had to set the reference, and then I'm going to publish this thing, and Microsoft did the right thing, right? It must have the correct DLL, especially that Microsoft SharePoint client DLL. Either I don't know if I'm pushing it up or if it's just available to me. Do you know that, Richard?
You're pushing it up.
Okay. Yeah, so
You're pushing it up, and it's going to use the version of that package, that assembly that you built with, because it's going to put you don't see it. It's serverless in the sense that you don't see a server, but there is one. There's not just one. It should be replicated to give you high availability. But there's going to be a bin folder, an invisible bin folder up there, and your wild binaries are going to go to references.
So Jason, when we're talking about future things, can we switch back? I think you're still talking about the 4.2, the right to SharePoint.
yes.
And you're wondering where that underlying generated.
Well, this reference, right? So I use this. This is a DLL that I referenced in this code.
For your CRUD, it spins up a CRUD for you, doesn't it? Doesn't it spin up?
Well, it's using
calls?
it has calls for the SharePoint context like this stuff, right? This is a SharePoint client context, right? And then execute queries context, right? So this is what I need to do to make those client-side SharePoint calls, right? And I didn't have to load the DLL up into the cloud. It just went for the ride when I published this thing,
So does that also then leave the issue of versioning then? Like I'm assuming that everything lives in Azure. Like say a new version of the DLL just happened. Is that going to break the code that you already created, or will you not know that until it breaks? Or is it going to automatically be backward compatible?
It's not going to push any new DLLs into your function
No,
once it's
right.
deployed to Azure.
Right. Okay.
So the only thing that
I was just thinking about the invisible bin folder, right? Because there's like a timestamp or a day that DLL was created using that version, say whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a time when, let's say 5 years from now, where the weather app just stops working because now Dark Sky changed their API and the DLL that I had working in Azure is no longer working, and I'm assuming that Microsoft is updating the background, like say a new JSON function happens or whatever, but is that going to break my code, I guess? I'm assuming there will be a point in time where it'll break, right?
Well,
There will be a
if they
time.
grandfather something, I mean,
Right,
so we
right.
have calls to ASP 2.0 or whatever, and they've got it hidden, and we're running our own app pool, and that's how they're doing their isolation or whatever black magic they're using.
Well, that's my question though. What's the blank? What if tomorrow Microsoft says, you know what, ASP,
Well,
we're not supporting that
So,
anymore.
I think the answer is this: that external services that you're calling, if they don't change their APIs, then you don't have to change your DLL.
So the bin folder just stays static. It just created that time and it never changes.
Because these client libraries, both the SharePoint. Let's just talk about SharePoint. SharePoint client library is calling SharePoint via SharePoint's native RESTful API. You don't have to load and deal with that RESTful API. This library does that for you. As long as the library's understanding of how the API works is still correct, then the library will keep working.
Right.
As soon as Microsoft changes that API, which they're almost certainly going to do
That's my
over the
concern.
next 10 years, and
Or
maybe
10
the next
months
6
or
months,
whatever.
then you will need, then your application will stop working, and you will need to get the latest version or at
Find
least
out
a
what
newer version that
What
works,
broke? Right, we got to find out.
and then you'll need to deploy it again.
And we're having that in SharePoint Online now. The
Sure.
last 6 months, we've had 4 critical issues.
Yeah.
As they have tweaked something, it's blown sky high. We had problems with workflows. We have problems with the click-through on PowerPoint presentations. We were going, hey, we got content management solved, deploy PowerPoint everywhere. And then a day after the launch, they tweaked something. And then all of a sudden the link stopped working. Everybody's going, this internet thing's
Sucks.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, a lot of people are down on SharePoint in general because it just changes so much. Like, and now we're putting it in the cloud. What are we going to do? We don't even have it on premises to go and look at what happened.
Yeah, well, no,
That's a big
where
problem.
That's where
Yeah, that's a big problem.
we're hoping the education campaign / poison Kool-Aid campaign works. We'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah.
No, we have the same thing going on a project I'm doing with CRM. Okay, we have a dynamic, we have a CRM workflow that we built in 2011 for CRM 2010, and now it's 2017.
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, hey, the library we used then won't work anymore when they upgrade to work for almost 8 years. It's about to break, and we know it, and so we have to get the new library. Our code won't compile anymore against the new library because they had changed things at the .NET level.
Right.
So we got to rewrite a little bit of code, and
Now you're not allowed to put DLLs in Azure, so now you got to figure out this
well,
thing.
at least our application still works once we get the API part fixed.
All right, so the BA Weather app. So we're looking at the Azure portal at this point, right? And I'm looking at the BA Weather app 1, which is the name of the project, right? So we can have multiple classes that have functions that are exposed in that BA Weather app 1, and they'll all be versioned against the same DLLs that go up, right? So the bin directory is shared with everything under the lightning bolt. Okay? So if you had 2 lightning bolts, right, you would have 2 versions potentially of files, of client libraries. Does that make sense? Because you could, the second lightning bolt could be deployed 6 months from now, right?
I was just concerned because you were saying that you didn't know what the client infrastructure that was being used, right? You didn't know if it was coming from SharePoint or not, or is it based on the browser version that you got?
Well, I didn't know if that DLL was up there ready to go already. Okay, because it was just a reference that I made on the client when I pushed it. Richard answered that question that it goes to. Okay.
By the way, while we're here, click that link that says Function App Settings. Scroll down a little bit. Right there. Application Settings at the very top there where it says Manage Application Settings. Click that. And this is where you put your password.
Oh, excellent. Right here?
Right here. And then there's a Web Config Manager class that's part of the standard Azure SDK that will read settings out of here if it finds them in here, and if you have a web config file, it'll look there next. It doesn't find it.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. I will make the change and change my password. Okay, so.
So one more thing on Coach Jason. So I think you answered his question by saying with these lightning bolts, effectively, you can have multiple signatures for the same API call, right? Is that what you're saying? So if the interface changes, you can support the old one.
Yes. Right.
As well as the new one.
I would create a new project.
That may address his question to a certain extent. I got old slop, I leave it there, my lightning bolt, my new API is a new lightning bolt living in the same module possibly, is what you're saying.
Well, it's just hosted. It'll have a new URL.
Okay.
Right.
So does that mean it's a new binary, it's a new DLL?
Yeah.
Oh, it does. So it maps to the second one.
Yeah.
But in that project, so we don't have 2 lightning bolts in one project.
Correct.
Okay. So, and that gets back to what they said at dog food. 1 for 1 with events in the code that you're running there. Okay.
Okay. All right. Let's keep going. So. Yeah,
I'm just concerned it's going to break.
We're going to queue it up just like we queue up everything now. when this breaks, so documentation where I am has never been a big issue. We are now effectively modifying paired programming so that we have two people working on something, one person's writing it, another person's helping and documenting. And so we have at least minimal documentation so that when it does break, we go, what the hell did we do 6 months or 6 years ago? Oh, is this enough? Well, gosh, we still suck. Okay. But we got something to work from.
But then you're like, oh, none of these things match to any of the new things. Well, shit, we got to learn everything new again.
If it goes long enough, yes, we're going to have to rewrite.
What's long enough anymore? It used to be 5 years. Now it's 6 months. Like it's not long enough anymore.
Okay, if I used to drive pizzas, that's my backup plan. I won't be able to pay my mortgage, but people will be happy to see me. So.
I'll pack a farm.
Okay, so to publish this up to Azure, we go ahead, right-click, click the Publish button. Now, it's going to ask us to create the lightning bolt. All right, so we name it, give it an app name. That was my subscription that I was using, the Dev Essentials. All right, so resource group, app service plan, these are things that have to be created, new, right, for storage accounts. So this is the disk space up in the cloud, and these are the things that are keeping track of consumption, all right? And this is where it's going to run, this app service plan. So I picked the East slot, US2, all right? Let's see. Then I hit create. I was signed in with my account that, it picked up the subscriptions that are basically bound to this account, okay? Yeah, I think it's kind of cool with legacy, right? Can't get one of those anymore. Everything is set up right here, and you click publish, okay, for the web deploy. And it made its way up there, all DLLs, everything. Okay, so now we have the Azure function running in the cloud, looking at the dark sky API, writing to SharePoint. Then I turn my attention over to the web part. All right, so SharePoint Framework. All right, it provides the browser support for client-side customizations. All right, so everything is client-side customization now. Right, we don't do server-side code anymore. All right, provides easy access to SharePoint data. The customizations can run or do run in the current user context, so all the security has been figured out. And we have the open source web dev tools. All right, this thing just came available in deployed or available in SPO in spring 2017, and now just this fall, like a month ago, it was there's a feature pack that allows it to happen on premises in SP 2016, right, to use the same tooling. Okay, so let's talk about what we have to do to start. So we have to create a SharePoint development environment. Like I said, there's a link that I have in the references to create your own tenant for development purposes. I mean, they want you to pay for it and everything, but it's something that developers can use to figure this out. All right, you need to create two site collections. One is an app catalog, and the other one is developer site. All right, so I'm not going to talk about the detail of deploying this to production tonight, but I'll just cover it. I'm not going to show step by step because you have to get good with it. There's multiple steps, and it's kind of boring. All right, but I have a slide to talk about it. The developer site, though, I'll show you, and it's necessary for testing. All right, so now, in terms of development stack, all right, C# developer, you do some JavaScript, obviously, because you're a web developer with SharePoint, right? But it's a culture shock for this new development paradigm. Now, at first, I was like, oh man, there's a lot that you have to configure, and how much of this do I have to figure out? But then, after I used it for a while and get everything set, the development cycle is much faster than it was, right? We would have to wait to, either hand move a DLL if we were working on a VM, or we would have to deploy a DLL with a solution to test, right? So that dev cycle was really long. Now it's very fast, okay? And the reason is that they have placed a Gulp server. Gulp runs a node server that is a web browser or a web server that's on your computer, all right? So let's go through this. Let's go through the mapping. On the top is what we used to do. We have .NET, C#. We use NuGet to get references, Visual Studio, C#, MS Build, okay? And that was just the normal things, create a project, hit the references, do the build, we're good. Now on the bottom, we can see that Microsoft.NET is going to map. So that's really IIS, okay? Microsoft.NET, ASP.NET, right? It's going to map to Node.js for this development environment. NPM is going to be our NuGet, so our package manager. We're going to use Visual Studio Code, which is that blue Visual Studio, all right? Which is not the Community Edition. You could use the Community Edition, but I'm going to show the Code Edition, all right, which runs on like Mac and Linux, all right? And Yeoman, which is the solution generator, all right? So it's like, when we go into Visual Studio and we pick Azure Function or SharePoint type or console, right? That's what Yeoman's going to do. Instead of using C#, we're in TypeScript. Whew. Okay, and then our build service is Gulp, okay, and then we have this thing called Webpack that bundles up all of the artifacts and gets them ready for deployment. So I mean, they obviously hired this group who is very familiar with the open source dev technologies, because that's a radical shift. Right? And it's not, everything is open source except for the Visual Studio code. All right? So now I want to.
No, code's open source too.
Is it? Okay. There you go. So I got this deck, by the way, from the URL at the bottom. It's one of the like a SharePoint MVP who has a learning class, right? It's like $300 he's basically doing a plural site type of thing, right? But it's very helpful, get you up to speed, cut through all this stuff to really target what you need to know, step by step, So I like, I pay for training, right, to get up to speed quickly, and shout out to that product there. So click on the link, check it out. He's got a free set of information on how to get all this set up, and then he has like a class that walks you through setting up a web part and creating a web part. So, and then it goes, too much information, right? But
So Jason,
yeah.
Are you saying Node.js runs on all these client machines that?
This is a development machine.
Okay.
This is your development stack. So when you're done, after you get to from the left to the right, and you have this output. At the end of the day, it's JavaScript. It's a JavaScript file, and you don't even deploy that to SharePoint. Right. You have to put it in a CDN somewhere, production-wise, for it to work, to be downloaded. Yes.
CDN. What's that stand for?
Content Delivery Network.
Right. Say it again, please.
Content Delivery Network.
Yeah, CDN.
So
Okay.
you have to.
Sure, separate from SharePoint Server. Right?
Yeah, so you have to, so there is no deal, there's nothing, there's a manifest that gets installed into SharePoint Online, okay, to let the rest of the SharePoint engine know that something's there that has to display, but then it calls out to this, they call it transpiled, right, not compiled, it's translated from,
Just in time.
no, it's translated from TypeScript into JavaScript. So all of the code that you create is really going to boil down into JavaScript. And then that's available for the browser. So let me keep going. I want to show it. So the big thing here is that Node.js runs locally, and you start the web service by calling gulp serve. So let me show you what this looks like. All right. So I have everything installed on this machine, and this is a web server that's just hanging out there ready to go. So let me stop it for a second. Okay, so this Hello World WebPart 01 Yeoman has been used to create this structure. Okay, so you use Yeoman to say you install the templates from Microsoft to say create a SPFX WebPart solution. And then you get this directory structure, right? It's all scaffolded for you. You run it, and there's a workbench that this server on this machine is going to provide. All right, so let me start this up. And it is going to take a minute and then open the browser onto this. So if you look, it says localhost 4321. This is not IIS doing this. This is Node.js running JavaScript to host my client-side component. All right, give it a second. You can see this chugging along. See it? It's doing its thing, serving up files. Boom, we're in this workbench, all right? I go and I can see my Hello World web part that's here. I load it up. I have a bug, but let's pretend that was a first click. And the web part is running locally.
You're getting in the Office 365 thing, this is just like a template?
Yes, this is just all JavaScript HTML that's coming from the local scaffolded information, right? And it's serving up something that looks just like Office 365. Now, we don't have lists here, right? What you do is you go out to Office 365, SharePoint Online. I close my web browser. Stand by. I'm going to bring up Firefox. All right, so let me log in and then I'll show you. So I'm going to my developer tenant, okay? And now there is a workbench file that now exists in SharePoint Online. It's in the layouts folder. All right. So this is, we're in our development environment, right? When you deploy this to production, you don't have this workbench stuff, right? It's just the web parts that are running. All right. So let me log in here. Maybe I'm out there. No. No, same thing. All right, let me close this one down. Let me go up into this. All right, this is my developer site. I have a weather list right there. And then I go to Workbench, right? So I'm going to go to underscore layouts, 15, workbench. So this thing is serving up from really SharePoint Online. All right, now watch. I have to do 2 clicks here because, again, I have a problem. But you can see there are more web parts available. These are the real published web parts, right, that are available in SPO. Here's mine. So how does it know this? How does it know that I have a hello world? I didn't deploy anything. Well, this workbench is running JavaScript, and it's looking for my local server, my local Node.js server. Yeah, right, because it's just JavaScript. So it is, I mean, the workbench is running JavaScript that's looking locally for the information. It sees that I'm running a Node.js server. It knows all about it, and then it goes and says, what's available. Hello World's available because it is running only in the directory of my component, right? I started this in the Hello World directory, okay? So if I want multiple components going, I have to start up multiple Node.js backed web servers, right? If I have like 2 or 3 that I'm developing at the same time, each in its own directory. And this JavaScript on the SPO workbench is going to know about them all, right? And I think it's pretty cool. Very different. Okay. This does not work. You will not see my hello world, right? Because I'm not deployed anything up there. All right. So when I discovered that, I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. All right. Does everybody get that? Yeah? All right.
I'm wondering if you might, in the future, share an architecture drawing of that development environment on your machine as well as in the cloud. So I don't think we have a picture to visualize what you just shared.
Okay. All right. Let me try to explain it one more time.
No.
Okay.
I was just thinking.
A picture.
Some folks like to see a picture.
Okay.
I mean, the block diagram initial one was really helpful.
So maybe you can add a slide to the deck before we publish the deck.
Yep. All right, now I'm going to show you the code. All right.
This one is everything is in
Yes.
I will say from an editorial standpoint, I'll join in the opinion that I think Microsoft, this started when .NET Core started, a year and a half ago when they first released .NET Core. I think Microsoft grossly overestimated how ready the .NET development community was to embrace all this stuff that comes from a totally non-.NET environment, just because they were embracing it. Node.js and Gulp and NPM and Webpack, even TypeScript for a lot of developers, even JavaScript for true blue .NET developers. That's a lot to jump over or climb all of a sudden to get to something that isn't that different in your eyes from what you were already doing just fine with C# and ASP.NET.
I wish that as I've gone through this, the thing that would be better is if I could write C# code and it generates JavaScript and just takes care of this.
You can do that with F# code. But I don't think anyone has room to train software. There we go.
All right. So here is this is the Hello WebPart directory structure, all right, for our solution that Yeoman generated for us, all right. This is VS Code. So this will, you'll have the same, yeah, you'll have the same experience on your Mac with the same UI, all right. Now,
and I believe there is no restriction on having to use this only for open source projects.
I couldn't figure out how to hook this up to TFS yet, or Visual Studio.
It's not easy.
Have you done it?
It likes Git much better.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's see. So out of all this stuff, the three things that are very interesting, four things to us, are the main code, which is in the TypeScript file here, hello webpart.ts. Let me try to close this. Okay, the mock HTTP client TS, which is how I feed my local workbench data. Then here is the style sheet, all right, that is being used. And then here is this SkyCons.js. So this is the code, the open source code that makes the weather controls move, right, and renders the controls. So this is a plain old JavaScript file, all right. To call from me, right, C# guy knows JavaScript, but kind of learning TypeScript on the fly, there were certain hoops that I had to jump through to get a plain, it's called non-module JavaScript module to load in TypeScript. So there are modules, and then there are non-modules. So TypeScript likes the modules, all right? And just your regular legacy JavaScript code in your libraries is going to be this non-module stuff. So basically everything's global, right? When you're in a regular JavaScript library that you've used for the past 5 to 10 years, all that stuff is really global, right? TypeScript wants modularized code, right? It wants to have a container, a scope. So you have to fake the scope out, all right? That took me a goodly amount of time this weekend to figure out, but I did it. All right, so here we go. So I am not going to read this line by line, but I want to highlight the class. So here's our class, which this is where the real stuff starts, all right? And in this class, it generated all this. Extends base client side web part, all right? It has a bunch of interfaces set up, okay? There's this render function. In the render, it basically writes out all that blue stuff in the inner HTML, right, of a div that exists for the Hello World web part, all right? The interesting things here are classes have to be, when you're in line, right, with this HTML, I said that those classes, your style classes, get scoped too. So when all this, gets watered down or transpiled into JavaScript, there are scopes that are necessary, and this method of styles, $ curly brace styles.hello world is going to get the decorated name of the styles generated into the JavaScript. I mean, good luck stepping through the JavaScript after it's done with this whole process. Okay. Weather report contains our graphics, okay, and what else? All right, this is just render the weather. So I did it old school tables just to get the alignment. All right. So this is it, and then here's the play when you're done, and that's what starts all the cool icons dancing around. I did use the async in this to get my data from the list, by the way, Richard. We have, it knows about local environment right here on 139 versus a SharePoint environment versus classic SharePoint. So these things work on, we have modern pages, we have classic pages in SharePoint Online. It works on both, right? Okay. So this is where the code goes for my mock data versus the actual list data, all right? It's pretty straightforward once you study it and step through it, okay? It's not that bad. So then after, the cycle of making modifications is pretty easy. Let me go back to my deck, see if there's other stuff I need to talk about here. All right, create a new solution with Yeoman. I may come back to that. We talked about the workbench. SPO site uses real data. I showed you that. All right, here's one I was show you a code change. So compared to the old way, all right, let's go up here and say from Jason and Richard, okay? So I'm right here, and it says, hello, Azure.net SIG. I think, is that the name of it now? Or is it the Azure SIG? Azure.net, that's right. Okay. I know we're rebranding.
Good idea. By next month, maybe
Okay, so here we go. I'm going to hit save. Boom. And then I go over here. You see it's listening. It's just listening in that directory. It's rebuilding and retranspiling. And I'm going to go and hit refresh. This is my developer site. I might have not have finished transpiling yet. Oh, come on. There we go. That is a lot faster than old SharePoint development, right? So, yeah, that's pretty impressive. Oh, hey, look, my icon changed, right? It was the sun. Now we're in the evening, and I got the new one, right? So it's really working. It's the moon. Okay. Next up, deployment.
Before you do deployment, what's the debug scenario?
Okay. The debug scenario is JavaScript debugging.
Really?
Yes. So, yes. So you're in the browser doing it.
Me, in Visual Studio Code, there looked like an area out there next to the code.
Yeah.
that you could
So
click on.
I didn't do it that way. I tried to, but there was something I didn't have configured right to get the IDE connected to all those other moving parts.
Well, I think one problem is that you want to debug the TypeScript, right? You don't want to debug the JavaScript. You want to debug the TypeScript. Code itself is written in JavaScript. Code itself is actually a browser shell.
Oh, really?
And everything you see in code is actually running in JavaScript or TypeScript.
problem.
Hey, hit that.
Sorry. All right. The development tool stack has the workbench.html. So you can, on a developer machine, you can do your development work. All right. When you have to actually, but you have to mock out the data, right? When you want to hit lists, then with the latest feature pack of 2016, you can use the workbench that comes with that, hit the lists, right? Test your list lookup and write code. All right, so you don't need SPO for that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to quickly go over this. I'm not going to step through it. We've got a lot to go through so far today. But this is a high-level overview of what has to happen with deployment. So the first thing you have to do is determine where you're going to host the assets, right? That JavaScript that is actually doing all the work that TypeScript transpiles into has to be hosted somewhere. Images, web assets like CSS has to be placed somewhere, okay? They're saying you can put it in an Azure Content Delivery Network or Office 365, okay, for SharePoint Online. On-prem, it'll be probably somewhere in SharePoint, okay, or just IIS. I'm not sure yet for on-prem.
Okay. We can use style library or site assets anymore.
No. Well, maybe that would be a place to stash it, okay, for this. But the CDN is going to have caching too, so it's not always hitting your SharePoint libraries or content databases to get information out, right? That's what the purpose of a CDN, right? Like Akamai, right? All right, so there will be a configuration process that you have to go through for those assets, right? So you have to deploy that stuff separately from this SPPKG file, right? So you're going to run gulp, which is your make utility, right? It's going to make or gulp the actual production deployment manifest files that then go loaded up into your app catalog site, okay? I'm not going to walk through that whole process. It's a little bit boring, like I said, but there's know that the deployment isn't as easy as the workbench stuff, right? There's work you're going to have to do to deploy it out to production. All right. Okay, what are other line of business ideas with this Azure job technique? Okay, so stock ticker web part, that's a classic one. You know, you would go reach out, get the data, stash it, and you know, I wouldn't make day trading investments with that information because it's a delay, but you could still get a general gist of what's happening. Let's see, review the yeah, this is a good one. So we run into customers who need, their legal department needs to look at different documents in different time frames, right? So you could think of a library that has a bunch of legal documents, and on the legal document, the lawyer would say, this one I need 60-day review, this one I need 30-day review, this one I need 120-day review, right? You could imagine a Azure timer function here going out and scanning through that list of documents in that library and then kicking off like Microsoft Flows to go get this thing reviewed and updated, okay? That's another one. You can move data from external database into SharePoint. Sometimes that's used as metadata reference lookup data. You could create a new site when a CRM customer record has been added, all right? Especially if it's online CRM, maybe with that webhook that wakes up and triggers the Azure function to do that. You can apply metadata like to doc sets when CRM customer record is updated. So, all these are things that I built on-prem timer jobs for, right? And now we have this new model, new development model that we can follow to do this type of work. These are kind of my favorite type of SharePoint apps that have this back-end piece and on the front end. All right, so
Be able to talk to both on-prem and now
yes,
on cloud.
yes. All right, here's a lot of good information here, references, right? So number one is to set up your developer tenant, all right, how to get a new one. Two is how do I migrate? So, you know, with SharePoint Online now, we use script editor web parts and we put JavaScript in those web parts, and they just kind of, you know, ran in the context of those pages. This is where I found the information on how to get libraries that were used in those situations, right? How to get them integrated with TypeScript, all right? Especially that like skycons.js file, right? That legacy JavaScript file. How to get it into TypeScript to work, all right? This way. That was a really good article. So there was somebody who gave like a dog food style, right? Conference talk on the building great client-side web parts. There's two of the dark sky docs, and then the icons if you're interested. Working with lists and list items with REST is the next one, and then there's that link out to that training material on how to build these web parts. All right. So I think this is a good reference list to get started. This is the one I used. All right, when I was digging around, and I would attack them in that order. Okay. So that's it.